A little over 100 years ago, there were only 1.5 billion people on Earth. Today, there are 6 billion of us, and at some point in this century, the population could surpass 10 billion. Of the 6 billion of us alive today, less than 1/3 are living and working in the kinds of buildings described by our building codes. Yet we proceed as if we can shelter the other 2/3 of the population in the resource, waste, and pollution-intensive ways now mandated by our codes. We haven't got the resources to do that, and our life support systems on this planet simply can't withstand that much of an assault. If the justification for having building codes is that we need to protect people from the built environment, but the regulations we've created to do so are inadvertently encouraging the destruction of the natural systems we all depend on for our survival, then we are obligated to go back and rethink our regulations from that larger, more holistic perspective. In the final analysis, it cannot be more important to protect individuals in specific buildings than it is to protect the future of all of us on this planet we call home.
If we're going to take a step back and rethink what we're doing, a good place to start would be to look at the materials that we use for building. In the past, people built with materials that were locally available and typically minimally processed. Now, out here in the Arctic, there's not a wide choice of materials to use. But what do we think of using water as a building material? Do you think this is a safe structure? Do you think we could write a building code for water? I think we'd probably all agree that we'd want to put water into the category of alternative materials. So let's take a look at a conventional material, wood. Wood is obviously our material of choice for construction in this country, since well over 90% of residential and light commercial construction is wood frame construction. But if wood were introduced today as a new building material, it couldn't get into the building codes because it has virtually every problem that a building material could have. Think about it. There are hundreds of species. The strength and durability is dependent on the species. Also some of the conditions that existed while it was growing, how it was dried, how old it is. The strength is dependent on things like the orientation of the grain and the size and frequency and location of knots. It rots. It burns. Insects like to eat it. It's dimensionally unstable. It splits. It supports bacterial and fungal growth. And yet with all those problems, we use it every day without really thinking about it. And yet if you try and introduce a new or an old material today that has one or two of those problems, it's nearly impossible to get it certified and into the codes.
I recently had the experience of visiting with an old friend who happens to be Swiss. He lives in Switzerland, in a little farm village in Switzerland. And I was sitting in his living room chatting with him about our lives since we spent much time together. This is a person I knew 30 years ago. And I lived in Paris when I knew this fella, and he lived upstairs from me. And since then, I came back to the States. He moved to Switzerland to live in the village where he was born. And we were talking about what we've both done in life since we last spent a lot of time together. And I told him that I was involved in building regulations in the United States. And he was trying to figure out exactly what that meant. He's not a person who's out of the construction industry. But as we were sitting there in his house, which is somewhere over 500 years old, and it's built of daub and wattle construction, I was trying to explain to him that we sometimes have problems in the United States with building materials that are less than safe or less than durable. And that was an issue that seemed, the significance of which seemed to escape him because he was familiar with all of these building materials and buildings that are older than this country is.
The reason you want to use these renewable resources is that it's better for the earth, and it is, of course, and that's really important. But there's another factor that most people don't realize is it's just a better building product as well. I mean, it's a win-win all the way around, and so the health or optimized situation occurs at the individual level all the way up to planetary level.
green products or green buildings or anything to do with green is a concept or a perception that I personally held that green products are kind of out on the outside, that they're, somebody's trying to push an environmental product onto you that may be more expensive or inferior in some way. But as I got more involved with this process, I discovered that that isn't true at all, that products that are green are not necessarily inferior. In fact, contrary to that, they're in many cases superior.
As we change how we think about buildings, by seeing them as whole systems embedded within larger systems, we can begin to recognize opportunities to create buildings that are not just less harmful or more efficient, but buildings that are regenerative and even beneficial.
The standards by which we build buildings, which are building codes and ordinances, were and are, for the most part, reactions to bad things. So if there's a fire and some people don't make it out of the building, then there's a whole set of calculations that take place. Well, did we make them run too far? Should there be more fire stairs? Should there be more fire suppression? Are these the wrong materials? And so all of these codes and ordinances have been created normally out of the reaction to an unfortunate event, when in fact the world of design and the world of nature operates totally differently. Good design in nature happens in a very integrated way where everything is interconnected and interdependent. And what we're discovering in the building of communities, buildings and communities, neighborhoods, cities, etc., is if we can accept the fact that our built environment is a part of the larger natural environment, interconnected and interrelated, that we have an opportunity to build more restorative communities. So this is a remarkable opportunity in the development of human potential to begin patterning these decisions and these guidelines around larger principles that are more integrated and can create systems that add vitality to our lives and our health and our joy as we redefine and rethink our communities.